Thank you so very much for coming. The weather is beautiful, so for you to have braced out and come in, I appreciate it deeply. I want to thank Rebecca so much for inviting me, the faculty and staff, students of this beautiful college, the School of Liberal Arts and Department of Religion and Theological Studies. Most especially, I want to thank all of you for coming. I have a few disclaimers to make, two actually. I am not an Islamic scholar, and English is my fifth language. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, just wave at me, and I will repeat myself so that we can communicate. I'm just a lawyer. So what I'm going to share with you this evening is a hands-on practice on the field for the past 22 years. Mostly the past 12 years in the Shariah courts. So that is actually the thoughts that I want to share. I sort of put the thought in three boxes. Since we're not a very large group, I was thinking we should have more interaction at some point, rather than me speaking to what you don't know. Ask me what you want to know, and I'll speak to it. But I'll introduce some teams, and I will speak to that. When I drove in, I noticed how beautiful the campus is and how diverse the students were also, and also I saw that on the website. I was struck by the core values of this institution, which is service, hospitality, community, and the pursuit of truth. How so powerful. But this pursuit of truth in scholarship and in engagement sort of comes into what I will be speaking to in a moment. And I was fascinated by the Trinity, the faith, the hope, and the love that are part of what this institution is all about. I'll be speaking to practicing in Shariah courts and humanizing the extreme. So let me give you some background so that we could be speaking and understanding a little bit of each other. I come from this beautiful country called Nigeria, and it's in West Africa. And I don't know how many of you know how many countries are in the continent of Africa and how big the continent is. But I'm going to be speaking about this specific country called Nigeria. If you look at the map of the continent of Africa, I'll just give you a bigger picture. You can take United States and Alaska and put it in Africa, and add China, and add the entire Europe and put it all in Africa. That is how big the continent is. So when somebody speaks about Africa, be careful what you are hearing. I'm not here to tell you I know much about that continent. I don't even know much about the Western region, which has only 16 countries. And Nigeria is huge and diverse. We have 167 million people. We are the 6th largest Muslim country in the world. Of course, the largest is Indonesia. We have 80 million Muslims in Nigeria. Nigeria is basically divided into the south and the north. I'll be speaking to Sharia, which Sharia is not in the south. The south are Christians. The north are Muslims. And somebody asked me, what is the percentage? You know, it was suggested, we don't have clear statistics, but 40% Muslim, 40% Christians, and 20% are in between. So that is how diverse the country is. We have 4 legal systems in the country, at least 4. We have the common law. This is as a result of the independence we got from Britain, and they left the legacy of the common law. And then we have the Sharia, Even before independence, we had the Sharia. We have the customary law, which is codified, and we have the traditional laws, which are not codified. But my focus today will be on the Sharia, which is the cases I've been involved with. So that is the country. We do have a lot of challenges, though. As beautiful as it is, we have 250 tribes and 400 dialects. Let me say a little bit about me so that you see where I'm coming from, that I have the authority and the local standard to speak about what I'm speaking. I became educated by accident, and I became a lawyer by accident. I guess I might have a teaching by accident, but it has been an accident of life that had made something out of me. I became a lawyer about 22 years ago, and I started in the Ministry of Justice as a prosecutor. So for 8 years, I was a prosecutor. And I left the Ministry of Justice in October 1998 and started a practice. For 2 years, I had no client because there was no woman from that region that has opened a legal chambers, so nobody believed that I have something to offer. And then I read newspapers and I look at the ceiling, and my husband, who is Italian, moved to the capital city, Abuja, and that is how I migrated from the north to the center in 1998. In 2000, we have what is now called the Sharia in Nigeria, and which is what I was speaking to. But we've always had the Sharia in the context of Nigeria. But the Sharia we had before 1999, October 27th, was limited Sharia, meaning that the Sharia is limited to issues of civil matters. And the civil matters were sort of itemized. Marriages, divorce, children, gifts, limited, and it is in the Constitution. And we have a constitutional government, by the way, we have a federation. Our actual Constitution was sort of picked from the United States and tweaked with some few things. But the same structures you have here, we have in my country. Instead of 50 states, we have 36 states, but we have the legislators, the judiciary, and the executive. So, Sharia was introduced in 1999 in a campaign. I mentioned that we got independence from Britain in 1960. So we had a long stretch of military rule. And in 1999, the military said we are going to hand over power finally to the civilians. And for that reason, there was a lot of campaign. And one of the governors that was campaigning to be a governor of a state of Zamfara is part of his campaign promise. If you elect me as a governor of Zamfara state, I'll give you Sharia. And he delivered on his promise. He was elected and sworn into office on May 29th, and October 27th, he launched Sharia. But actually what he did by launching Sharia was to introduce 5 new offenses and 5 new punishments. Basically, there are other offenses, but I'll speak to these 5 offenses, just mention them. So if you drink alcohol, you'll be flogged. Publicly, 100. If you steal, and in the process of stealing, you use arm and killed, which is called hiraba or armed robbery, you'll be crucified. If you commit adultery, now adultery is broadly defined, it's called zina. So fornication and adultery are lumped together. So if you commit zina, you'll be sentenced to death by stoning if you are married or have any semblance of marriage. If you commit zina and you are not married, you'll be flogged 100. If you steal, you'll have your limbs amputated. And the concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was introduced back into the system. So these are the 5 major things that Governor Hassani Ahmed Zamfara introduced in the system. In 2000, I was in my office and the phone rang. And it was an NGO far away in Lagos, and I'm in the north. And they asked me if I can put the first legal team to defend the first case of Sharia. And that is how I started the cases of Sharia. So from 2000 to 2008, when I came to Harvard, and up to January this year, I still go back to Nigeria to do the cases. I have been involved in 157 cases. Now, I do not charge for my service. I do them pro bono, basically because my clients, have foretrained. One, they are very poor. They have no voice. They are illiterate, and they are voiceless. So if you fall on these categories, I'll take up the case without thinking twice about it. So that is how I came into the cases of Sharia. But let me illustrate the practice, which is the topic I'm speaking to, the practice of Sharia, and I use the case of Amina Lawal to sort of speak about what is all about this Sharia, what is it about? And I'll speak a little bit about the strategies we use, and I'll end up with how do we humanize the extreme. So, after the case of Sharia, there are other cases. Sharia is the first case. And in 2001, a young woman called Amina, who was a mother of 4 other children before she had this baby, had a child out of wedlock, shortly after the introduction of Sharia in Zamfara State. She was charged to court of Sharia on 2 counts. She was pregnant and she has no husband. And the second count was that she confesses to adultery, to zina. She had no lawyer in court. She was tried and sentenced to die by stoning. And she was stoned on the 25th of September in 2002. So we came into the cases and the appellant process. The trial has been conducted and we came in to appeal the cases. So when we came in, we sort of articulate the case with 15 points in the first appeal court in Funtua. The 15 points are divided basically into 4 points. What are the issues of law in the case? What are the issues of facts in the case? What are the procedural issues? But in case we fail on these 3 counts, do we have a technical issue to lean onto? So these are the 4 broad perspectives. Whenever we prepare any case, these are the 4 groups we put them. Facts, procedure, law, technicalities. We argued the case before the first appeal court and we lost the case on all 15 counts. And some of you that may have been following global affairs on beauty pageants, we had the Miss World Beauty competition around that time happening in Nigeria. My sense of it, we got the huge media outlet because of the Miss World pageant coming to my country, because then the lady that was the Miss World was a Nigerian, so they are coming to stage it to hand over to another person. And so the press came in their numbers. And so there are huge publicity, but before the case of Amina, we had several cases that are even worse than Amina's case. But anyway, we got the press around Amina's case, and that is how the world began to know. But remember, 9/11 happened shortly after we had the cases. So there is sort of this connection of the world trying to look in this extreme set of areas. So we got a louder microphone. Now, what are the strategies we use? Now, the case of Amina and many of the cases I've been involved with has raised a lot of issues. I'll just mention a few of them by passing. A lot of questions have been asked. What sort of law is it in 2000? Somebody wants to stone somebody to death for having a child out of wedlock. Do you have the supremacy of law in your country? Is there separation of powers? I just spoke about 3 arms of government. Do we really have separation of powers? But what about the state and religion? Do you have that concept? Does it exist, the separation of state and religion? Oh, do you respect fundamental human rights in your country? It's not stoning, degrading, and inhuman, and torturous. Is the law certain? Is Sharia a certain law? Is it certain? What about equality before the law? What happened to the man? We just heard of the woman that is going to be stoned to death. What happened to the man? Is there equality between women and men in your country? I have been asked. Or are we equal before the law? Is there independence of judiciary? So these are questions I've been asked in the past, and I could speak to them if you want to hear. But let me just mention the strategy, generally speaking, and then I'll talk about the humanizing the extreme. Then we'll enter into Q&A. So basically, the work I have been doing at Harvard was to write this book on my reflection. And the 7 strategies I'm going to mention, I can speak to it in Q&A. What I put in the book is called Practicing Law in Shariah Court, 7 Strategies. Now, strategy number 1 that we try to adapt is to understand the dynamics. Anytime we go to any court in the rural areas and the grassroots, we make it a point of duty to understand not only the dynamics of the society of the villages, we understand the dynamic of the new Sharia law. We understand the dynamic of the society that today, 2010, 2012, or then 2000, it is not accepted for a woman to be pregnant outside wedlock. So we understood those dynamics. We try to understand the dynamics of the mullahs and the judges. But beyond understanding the dynamics, we choose to walk within the dynamics, and this is our strength. Walking within. All the cases I have mentioned were argued within Sharia courts, with Sharia law, before Sharia judges, and we got judgment in those courts. And I can speak to details about if you want to know. But how do you understand the dynamics, but beyond understanding the dynamics, walk within the dynamics? And strategy number 2 is how do we stay focused? I mentioned just a moment ago that we have this global media. We are not used to media at all. In fact, we have no cell phone in the villages. Most of the time, vehicles, cars cannot get there. Motorbike cannot get there. Horses may not be able to get there. So the best bet we had are donkeys or camels. So there is sort of no civilization. So we are not used to the press. When the press came in their numbers, with their cameras, with their microphones, as a lawyer, how do you become focused and stay focused on what you're doing? And some of the time we hear questions such as, oh, isn't it waste versus Islam? Is it a clash of civilization? Oh, we don't know what is waste versus Islam. No, we don't know what is clash of civilization. But I'll tell you something we know, and one thing we know. As a woman sentenced to die by stoning, and we are using the Sharia law to get her freedom and justice. That we know. So how do we become focused on what we do and stay focused on what we do? Not be swayed like the waves of the sea, that the wind blows and we move with it. Strategy number 3, how do you become firm and flexible? How do we become firm on issues of principles of law? And how do we become flexible within a society that is different? Strategy number 4, how do we pay attention to details? Some of the time we'll come out of court, you will hear a scream from one end of the courtroom. Oh, you Jews of Islam, Yahudawa. Yahudawa is a Hausa term for Jews. It's not a complementary term. But we are paying attention to these details, but yet staying focused and not joining issues. Strategy number 5, how do we have plans? I told you I was a prosecutor. So before we come to court, this is what we do. We first argue the case of the prosecution before we look at our defense. So we preempt the prosecution and we argue the case of the prosecution. It makes us a better defense counsel if we know the other side very well. But not only preparing for our defense, how do we have a backup just in case the strategy of our defense doesn't work? What backup do we have? So we have plan A, plan B, plan C, but we also have a plan D. A lot of these cases, we have been given fatwa on our head. Fatwa means that if they get us, they should kill us. How do you plan an exit strategy? That is our plan D. Strategy number 6. As lawyers, and I always will say to especially people that aspire to read law, that it's very important that we use the law as our strength. We must know the law, and I would tell law students, if you can eat the law, digest the law, sort of vomit it if you want to, but you just have to know it. Local laws, national law, international conventions and treaties and protocols, subsequent protocols. We have to know the law, because that is the strength of a lawyer. And the last strategy that I wrote about is how do we think globally and act locally. Now, in some of the cases, we never knew about all these protocols and international conventions and treaties on human rights. But having the benefit of having Lawyers Without Borders join us from France and Canada, we are able to be exposed to thinking globally. But most important, how do we use the global knowledge to act local? And if you want, we can speak to that in Q&A. But finally, let me speak about humanizing the extreme. And I'll make 4 points about the humanizing the extreme, and I'll end up with a story, a true story of trying to explain this humanizing the extreme. Now, in my own experience, to humanize the extreme, or to humanize, in our own cases, some of the Islamic fundamentalists, is to be humble. And I believe humility exalts. It exalts you. It doesn't bring you down. It sort of sprinkles you up. Humility. Strategy number 1 for humanizing the extreme. Number 2, you have to learn to make allies. And I'll tell you, and learning to make allies, we identify in our society the most powerful people may not be the president or the governor of the state. Actually, he may not even be the police officer in the village or the police officer in the town. The most powerful person or the most powerful allies we got to know are the beggars. They are the blind people and they are the lepers. He asked me, why are they powerful? Yes, they are powerful because they are the biggest source of information in the village. They are beggars, so they go from house to house every day in the morning to beg for what to eat. They have all the information in their fingertips, what is happening in the village. Now, if you have them on your side, then you have some certain degree of power that others don't have. And having the beggars and the lepers in our team, identifying with them, has a two-way traffic. You remember, they give you information, they also take information from you. So it's very important to understand some of these dynamics, but more importantly, that you have allies. You want to humanize the extreme, have some allies. One of them could be the unknown allies, or the people we look down upon. They could be very powerful to help us. The two other humanizing thought I had practically use is how to be kind and gentle. And I'll speak to it in a second. You want to humanize, learn kindness, learn gentility. It helps you communicate. It helps you to engage. And it has worked for me. And I'll give you an example to show you how it worked for me. And the last one I want to mention is what I called how to outwork they are never enemies, but people that disagree with us. How do you work hard and outwork them to the ratio of 2 to 1? You think higher than they are thinking. You try to foresee the unforeseeable. It's something that is more intuitive and it's wisdom. But you must learn, and we have learned through our own experience to outwork. And I will give you an example of that in a moment. But these are the 4 things I wanted to say. But to take this home, these 4 points home, I'll give you one example of how it had worked for me. In 2002, during the case of Amina Lawal, I was asked by a BBC reporter. BBC London is one of our most reliable news agencies, and they broadcast it in the local language. In the continent, next to Swahili, the most spoken language in the continent is a language called Hausa, and this is what I speak. So BBC has a Hausa service. And so a Hausa BBC reporter accosted me and asked me just one question. And the question he asked is stoning to death in the Quran? That was the whole question he asked, is stoning to death in the Quran? Anybody knows whether stoning to death is in the Quran? Anybody know whether it's in the Quran? Yeah? No, it's not. Does anybody know how many times there is stoning to death in the Bible? Any idea? Old Testament, New Testament? Yeah? 29. So, my answer to the question was, I do not think so. But the answer was played and played and played in the radio. And the mullahs decided to answer me. And what they said in the radio in response to my interview was that I was anti-Islam and I was anti-Sharia. And that is apostasy. And that means I should also be stoned to death. It was a public thing, it was on the radio. So I called the reporter that interviewed me and I asked him if I can visit with the mullahs and try to explain what I said. And he said something like, but you heard what they said. It's dangerous for you to do that. They have already made up their mind. They have said what they say. I kept calling the reporter and I kept impressing on him to introduce me to them. I want to speak with them. After I bothered him for so long, he said to me, I'll introduce you to them, but I will not be responsible for what happened to you. I thank you. And today I stand to tell you that a lot of what I have done after the first 47 cases were because of these mullahs. They were very gracious enough to want to see me. But they decided to see me in a mosque. A huge mosque in the city of Abuja. Maybe 5 times bigger than this hall. And I came in, if you can see me from where you are sitting, I am dressed. But I'm not properly dressed to be in the mosque. And I want to stress the issue of sensitivity. Going into the mosque, I had to be completely dressed. I'm not decent enough to enter some of our mosques. From my fingers to my toes were covered. And I walked into the mosque. At the end of the mosque, there were 8 mullahs. Halfway through the hall was a chair. While I was approaching them, I saw the chair, but I decided to walk toward them. And getting closer to them, I decided to kneel down and to sit on the floor. And they echoed at the same time, "Stand up, go and sit on that chair," they said to me. Now, in my culture, I'm not allowed to look at the men on their faces. So I was looking down to the floor. And I said to them, "How can I, your daughter, sit on the chair when you, my fathers, are sitting on a chair?" They were quiet for some time, and then they chorused at the same time. "Are you the lawyer?" they asked me. I said, "As you please, I am." "Are you Hauwa Ibrahim?" I said, "Yes, I am." "Oh, you have not forgotten about your religion, your culture." And I said, "But remember, I came to the mosque because of a radio interview. I did not speak about the radio interview I asked to come and see them. I said to them, I'm a foolish lawyer. I said to them, I'm a silly lawyer. Then I came to see them because I think I'm doing something out there to help clients, but I'm not sure I'm getting it right. And I came to them because I needed their wisdom. And I needed their knowledge. That was why I came to see them. Now, they were quiet for some time, and when they answered, they said something like, "We will not publicly support what you are doing," after a very long conversation, "but we'll also publicly not denounce you." You must understand that this is a very powerful statement for me on the field, that they are not going to publicly denounce what I'm doing. So, humility. The good book says when we humble ourselves, the good Lord will exalt us. It was not an act I put on. It was what I could have done with my father, with any person in that range, category of age. I would have done the exact same. I cannot sit on a chair. This is my dynamic. I understood it. I decided to walk within it. These are people that didn't want to see me for months. They saw me and they gave me their ears. And by the time I was leaving, they prayed with me. This is my dynamic. I don't know what your dynamic is. I don't know how you walk through it. But understanding it could help us understand how to walk within it. Let me end up by sharing why I do what I do. And I want to illustrate it with what I saw in the Bible. It's a parable of the sower and the seed. And Anybody knows about the parable of the sower and the seed? Anybody? Good. So if I mix it up, please rescue me. So there is a sower that went to sow his seed. And when he went to sow the seed, he dropped some on the side of the road. And the birds came and feasted on it, so they couldn't grow. And then some fell on the stony ground. They had no roots. There is no earth, so they also couldn't grow. Some fell inside a good ground, but there were thorns inside, and they were consumed by the thorns. But then the last one, they said it fell into good grounds. So it became rooted. Not only became rooted, it yielded 100-folds of yield. Yeah, I want to say this. I saw that as wisdom. Wisdom wrapped. And for students that are sitting here, I want to say this. There is a wisdom that is wrapped in the classes that you take. You must learn to unwrap it. There is wisdom that is wrapped in the subjects you are taking. There is wisdom wrapped in those instructors that stand in front of you. You must learn to unwrap it. And above all, there is a power inside of you that you need to use. And for me, why I do what I do is because I thirst and I hunger for knowledge. But I want to know beyond knowledge. And that beyond knowledge is wisdom. So I want to know, yes, but I want to know beyond that knowledge. And for those of us that are not students that are here, how do we know beyond? We have them. We have the power inside of us. And I know we can use it. In conclusion, that we will find in our studies and our undertaking in life one more day, one more time, one more issue. Of not only knowledge and wisdom, but the ability to use it to do good. And this is why I do what I do. And I thank you so much for listening.